Hi, Sam Schiffman here. Uh, Welcome to another episode of What's on My Mind. This is going to be a little bit different. I'm talking here about some thoughts which I'm starting to put together, and this is more of a call to action and interesting in gathering people's ideas on how we might do a formal representation of adaptive automation, which I'm affectionately calling Agentic Process Model and Notation for now. So let's talk. What I want to talk about is what am I thinking? What is this call to action all about? So if we think a little bit about traditional process automation, I have these great posters from my friends at Trizotech, and you probably can't read them, but I'll put links in the description to where you can download them. When we start talking about business processes, we've had a great deal of evolving time in which we've thought about how do we model business processes and how do we talk about them in a formal way that allows us to then easily make them computable. So we have primitives, like we have events that happen and activities and gateways. So those are this that help us build up decision trees, right? We have it so that an event starts there, and then maybe there's some activity, and then there's some gateway which decides which other pathways to go down with more activities, which are often tasks, and so on and so forth, right? In addition to, so this gives us a really good way to talk about straight up business processes that follow a flow, right? We also have what's called CMMN, or case management modeling and notation, which helps us because many things don't follow a straightforward flow, in that events can happen at different times, which kick off different parts of the workflow, and in a somewhat less deterministic way, let's say, although it's not non-deterministic exactly. It's capturing a process that's a little bit more complicated, such as the person may come in for a visit now, but they might cancel the visit, and they might come in for that visit later, but in between they get some lab tests done, or something like that, right? So this allows us to sort of say, okay, here's a case that we're managing. Also, if this symptom comes into the picture, we want to adjust and deal with it differently. So this allows us to model those things, but they're still very predictable. No, predictable is the wrong term for it, but they're still very much understandable. And then both of these are built on decision modeling notation, which allow you to effectively talk about how you can represent the decisions that need to be made in order to decide where to go in the case, or where to go in your business process, right? So that's great. That these have evolved over time and really give us a really good way to be able to talk about deterministic business processes and the sorts of case management that happen in the world. As we move into agentic systems, as I sort of talked about in my last couple of videos, as we move into agentic systems, we're going to have to think differently. We're going to have to think about things not as a business process, but as this network of agents that is working on our behalf. And I think what we're going to have to do is start to develop a new notation to start talking about those kind of environments. And I don't have that notation yet. Really, I'm just starting to think about it. But I think there's a couple of elements that we need to think about. The agent itself, right, which has, the LLM at its center, the prompt here, and memory and tools, right? and the prompt can be divided up into a couple of different levels, from the system prompt to the current conversation and any additional context. Right. So we've talked about that a little bit, right? I think the interesting thing is, as we talk about an agent, we need to understand basically, what tools it has available to it, and tools become part of this notation. But also the memory that really drives what the additional context is and what the current conversation. So the way I think about it, there's a kind of a long-term memory here. I can use a different color. So here is a long-term memory. And then these two, well, this is sort of a medium. Yeah. Medium memory. And this here is short term. What do I mean by that? Well, so the LLM is trained on a certain data set at the time that it's trained. As you work with the LLM, it can use that training set as its base, its long-term memory. I think we're going to see this medium-term memory explode over the next little bit of time, which is how does it both remember things that it's done in the past, but also we've already seen RAG, retrieval augmented generation, which augments that long-term memory with facts that happened since then, or facts which are proprietary, or so on and so forth. But what I think will explode is that part of that will also be remembering what it has done in the past, summarizing that up and providing that in a way that helps it do better in the future. And then the short-term memory is really what's going on right now, right? All those can be thought about as memory. So we need a way to talk about the memory that an agent has associated with it. So that will be one of the pieces I think that we'll need to talk about. We'll need to be able to talk about the tools that an agent can call. So the things that an agent can do, right? So things it can do, which, start out straightforward with kind of like APIs it can call. Also, that happens to be information it can gather. I think what's interesting is that we'll see, that also is going to be how LLMs can talk to each other, or agents can talk to each other, and we'll get this network of agents, which I've already discussed, right? So we'll get into that in a moment. There's also this concept, in some of the elements in BPMN really do apply. So there's events that happen, right? Events happen. And they have to come in, but they really come into this conversation here, right? So that's how they get into the LLM. So there's going to have to be ways that events in the world can come in to the LLM, and start things happening and start the agent network doing things. So we're going to need to be able to talk about events / messages. So events that come in, and then messages which go from one agent to another. From an individual agent's point of view, does it really matter if it was an event versus a message from another agent? Probably not, but we can get into that, right? So this gives us something that we can talk about. But then we really need to start thinking about how do we model these kind of networks, right? So when we have multiple agents working together, which I thoroughly still believe is going to be a requirement for us to really solve problems, what we're going to end up with is, you're going to end up with an agent here, an agent here, right? An agent here. What we need to be able to talk about is as these communicate, and I'm going to draw an agent over here that's not fully connected. We're going to need to talk about, first off, I think we're going to need a way to talk about what is the sphere of influence of an agent, what agents is it connected to, but what are the responsibilities of an agent? And this affects what kind of memory it's going to have and so on and so forth. But, an agent that is responsible, let's say for patient triage, right? And this is working on behalf of, in conjunction with the triage nurse to make sure that the right patients are getting to the right places, right? That agent needs to know a certain set of things. It needs to have a certain set of training, and it needs to be confined to that certain world of other agents that it can talk to. It can't talk to every agent out there. It can do, but it might well want to be able to talk to the agent that is managing the beds in the ward, if it's the emergency room, the ER, and knows which beds are going to free up sooner or later, right? That kind of thing. But figuring out that sphere of influence and talking about the responsibilities and sphere of influence of that agent is one of the things I think this notation is going to need to be able to do. It's also going to need to be able to talk about patterns of agents. There's a lot of really good work out there on, some of the patterns that are going on around, planning and blanking on the one that starts with an R. But in any case, there's a bunch of these patterns out there. I think we're going to see some around adversary too, where two agents are adversarial to each other. And we're going to see some patterns around consensus, where a bunch of agents are asked to do things, and then we take the consensus of the group. Those patterns get figured into this notation as things that we're going to want to be able to talk about. What we're going to want to talk about is where, when an event happens, right? So event happens here, right? Which causes that agent to start planning, and that agent's going to do a plan, and then that plan is going to start to get executed across the network of agents. It will change over time. The whole point of a agentic system is that it's not deterministic. It's not like you write the plan here and then that plan gets executed perfectly and comes back with the results. You could find out halfway through the planning that it should actually do something different, right? So we need a way to talk about that. We need a way to be able to say, okay, as I think about the world, here is an agent, here's its responsibilities, here's its sphere of influence, here is the patterns it's going to follow, and when it does things, here's how other agents are going to be notified and start acting with it, right? And whereas, for example, as I talked about the sphere of influence, this agent has a sphere of influence that includes these agents, but doesn't include that agent, except indirectly, right? Because this agent, for whatever reason, this agent knows about that agent, but the rest of the world doesn't know about that agent. And I think that's going to be very important to how we build these systems. So what the point of this video is that I'm thinking a lot about this and thinking about how we can start formalizing it in some way to be able to start talking about these systems. And I'm really interested if anybody else out there is doing similar work. I would love, either through comments or, look me up on LinkedIn or any of the various ways I can be reached. I'd love to hear about, articles that you've read that are along these lines that I should be reading, other videos that you've seen along these lines that I should be looking at, organizations who might be interested in this. I'd love to talk with people about it and see where we might go in this new and fascinating world of what I'm calling adaptive automation, the ability for us to build in computers processes that actually adapt to what's going on in the real world. So thank you. Have a great rest of your day.